Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Edward Ionel, and I cannot be more excited to have each and every single one of you with me today to take a sneak peek at scaling without so much pain. So before jumping into the demo, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, what I do here at Mirantis, and the technology that we will be observing today. So I'm responsible for growth and developer relations here at Mirantis. I seek out the pain points within Kubernetes to help streamline developer and operated initiatives. I'm specifically on the open source product team, which is Lens, here at Mirantis, and we will be jumping into a demo of this technology today. So I'm sure each and every single one of you know this already, but Kubernetes is quite challenging. People and organizations invest in Kubernetes, developers think it's too complicated or adoption may be slow. Thus, you may not be seeing the return on investment with containers that you should. This is where we introduce Lens. Lens is a desktop-friendly application for all of your Kubernetes needs. It's 100% open source and works with any certified Kubernetes distribution, regardless if it's UCP, GKE, EKS, Rancher, K3s, K0s, and so forth. As long as it's a certified distribution, it works with Lens. Lens allows developers and operators to easily access their applications in Kubernetes, hopefully improving productivity and increasing return on investment. So here's some stats I wanted to bring up to each and every single one of you so you guys can understand where we are in our journey. So we are the self-proclaimed #1 Kubernetes IDE. And the reason we're proclaiming that is because of these stats that you can see here. We have 13.6 thousand GitHub stargazers, 180,000 users, and 3.5 million downloads. I do want to mention that we have been in open source technology for just 1 year. We open sourced the technology back in March of 2020. So real quick, I know we're moving quickly and we're on a tight schedule. So there's several different things we'll be taking a look at through Lens today. One of those things being multi-cluster management. So being able to access multiple clusters, working with each and every single one of them while maintaining the correct Kubernetes cluster endpoint of the cluster itself. We'll take a look at the context-aware terminal, which is actually the magic behind being able to map to the correct Kubernetes endpoint. Meaning if I'm using a GKE cluster and I move to my EKS cluster, our terminal automatically matches to the correct cluster endpoint, which I think is extremely, extremely important when working with Kubernetes and trying to scale our services. We'll also deploy an application with the Helm package integration with Lens, which you have the ability to bring your own repo, or you can utilize the thousands of repos already pre-built into Lens itself. The next thing we'll take a look at is the extensions API. And there's two reasons why the extension API is so cool. One, it allows cloud native organizations, vendors, startups, companies to actually access our 180,000 users with their service by building an extension on top of Lens. And two, it allows our users, right, to be able to utilize your technologies, our vendors, our partners' technologies to be able to do X, Y, Z. So from here, we're going to jump directly into the demo. And once again, I apologize for sharing so much information at once. I'm trying to get as much of this in the 25 minutes that we have. So we will be going through various different functionalities, but those are the 4 key things that I want to highlight for this presentation. So let's jump directly into Lens. So here is Lens. Real quick, before taking a look at Lens, we're actually going to add a cluster to Lens. In order to do so, we'll click this icon, Add Cluster. There's 2 ways to add a cluster to Lens. You can find your kubeconfig file via your operating system by clicking this, or you have the ability to actually paste the kubeconfig file directly into this terminal and then select the correct context. For demonstration purposes, I'll actually paste my kubeconfig file. We'll grab it, we'll paste it. I'll select the correct context and I'll add the cluster. As soon as the cluster is added directly to Lens, you will see an overview screen of the cluster itself. I'll jump into this in much more detail in just a second. I do want to highlight that there are specific cluster settings that users can change and view all in real time if you choose to do so. So we'll do that real quick. We'll hit settings, and immediately we're brought into our cluster settings. We can see our clusters online, the distribution, which is GKE, the kernel version, the API address, the node count, where the kubeconfig file lives on my operating system. And we have some various different functionalities we can perform to really help us move from cluster to cluster, meaning I can give myself a new cluster name for easy access. I can create workspaces, and this is actually one of my favorite functionalities within Lens, and we'll definitely jump into this in further detail, but long story short, what it allows us to do is it allows us to build folders within Lens for our clusters, meaning I can have all of my production clusters in a workspace. I can have all of my proof of concept clusters in another workspace, or we can organize them in another fashion. All of my GKE clusters, all of my EKS clusters, all of my Mirantis clusters. So this is extremely useful when trying to scale and work with multiple Kubernetes clusters, right? Being able to access different clusters in different folders makes it much easier. And we'll jump into this in further detail in a moment. We also have a very cool functionality. It's more of a user experience thing, but the ability to bring your own icon to your cluster, right? So I can add different images to be able to identify my cluster very, very easily. Lens also has pre-built in Prometheus integration, which allows us to see our CPU, memory, how objects are performing, all in the last hour. So here you can see it's auto detect. We can bring our own Prometheus if we choose to do so, and so forth. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. So when I close this screen, this is the pre-built in Prometheus that you see. You can see how my nodes are running. You can see how they're running in the last hour, from the CPU to the memory to the pods, and so forth. This is extremely useful to very easily understand my cluster health in the last hour. So again, Lens brings in the pre-built in Prometheus directly to your cluster by just importing your cluster into Lens itself. The next thing I really want to touch on is the ability to switch from cluster to cluster. So here we can see I'm on my GKE cluster, and this is the smart console on the left-hand side with these icons. I can immediately jump into Edwards ConCluster, and the terminal maintains the correct Kubernetes endpoint of that specific cluster. When I click this, when I write kubectl version, we can see the version number, go to nodes, and we can see it matches, as you can see here. So this is extremely important when working with multiple clusters, right? If I'm working on a GKE cluster and I want to access, let's say, a Mirantis cluster, the terminal goes away, we open a new session, and of course, we can run the same command line to be able to see the version and so forth. This is the same cluster. I've just added multiple of these, as you guys can see. But long story short, whenever working with multiple clusters, Lens automatically matches to the correct Kubernetes cluster endpoint. And that is extremely important to mention. Another thing I want to mention within Lens itself is that Lens always leverages your role-based access control from your kubeconfig file. Meaning, if you might not be the owner of the kubeconfig file, or you have different permissions based on the kubeconfig file, you won't be able to perform all the actions that an admin or the owner of the cluster can perform, which makes sense. So for example, me being the owner, I can do various different things within Lens to my cluster or my resources or my objects, right? So if I click my Elasticsearch pod, here on the top and right, you can see various different functionalities you can perform. You can pod shell, you can view the logs all in real time. You can search the logs if you choose to do so, and so forth. And as you guys can see, the Prometheus actually follows each Kubernetes object throughout Lens, meaning this Elasticsearch pod, I can see the network, the file system, and so forth, right? If I jump into GKE, you can see again, the CPU, the memory, the network, the file system. And again, based off of your role-based access control, you can perform various different actions. Awesome. So we talked about several different things: switching from cluster to cluster, viewing your pre-built in Prometheus, seeing the metrics, your role-based access control, and the different functionalities you can perform, like viewing logs, node shelling, and so forth. Now I want to talk a little bit about the workspaces that we mentioned earlier. Workspaces, as mentioned, are so crucial. They allow us to create folders for our Kubernetes objects, or excuse me, clusters in real time, meaning I'm in this default workspace, but I can switch to my GKE first project, and I'm immediately brought to a new cluster. And you can see there's two different clusters here. And if I switch back, I can immediately go back to my default and begin working on these clusters. So again, your proof of concept clusters can have their own workspace, your Mirantis clusters can have their own workspace, your production clusters can have your own workspace, and so forth. That's really going to help you scale when working with, as you guys know, multiple Kubernetes clusters. So that's something I definitely wanted to highlight in this presentation. And again, I apologize for moving so quickly. I'm trying to bake as much of this information in as possible. Another very unique functionality that Lens gives us is the ability to get an overview screen of all of our Kubernetes objects and how they're performing. It is also color-coded. As you guys can see, green is good, yellow is pending, and red is bad. We can see our pods, our deployments, stateful sets, and various other Kubernetes objects and resources. Here at the bottom, you guys can see real-time events being sent to the user about our cluster itself. Clicking this event gives us a message of really what is happening to this particular object or resource in real time. So we can see the name, the namespace also that it's associated to, the reason, the source, and the type of message it is. This is a warning, so not so great. I also want to mention that anything that you guys see that is hyperlinked is actually clickable. So if I click this, it's going to take me to that exact resource or object that's in question, right? So we're able to move from object to object, from pod to deployment very quickly through Lens without writing any kubectl or command line and so forth. Another very cool thing within Lens is the ability to create resources in real time. So we can create a resource. We'll deploy an Nginx resource. Go to my notes, I'll grab this, and I apologize, I'm obviously not going to write it right now, but we'll copy and paste it. Jump back to Lens, copy and paste it, and click Create and Close. All in real time, we have deployed a new resource, which is our Nginx deployment, and we can find it here. And we can begin seeing the metrics associated to the memory and so forth. Another very cool thing that Lens allows us to do is actually leverage Kubernetes and the user interface to scale deployments up and down, right? So if I click this scale icon, I can actually scale this deployment to 8, begin scaling it, jump to my pods, and we can see containers being created all in real time. And the reason why that's so valuable, and I'm sure each and every single one of you guys can understand this already, is we didn't have to write any command line to do so. Jumping back to my deployment, we can take it, grab the scale. Of course, we'll drop it down. And of course, we're leveraging Kubernetes to do this, right? And here you can see it begins terminating those containers. Completed, some are running, and so forth. So this is extremely useful when adding resources, wanting to scale very quickly, and so forth. You can also always see all the details associated to this object as well, all in real time through Lens. Awesome. We've talked about many things so far. Now I really want to switch gears and begin talking about deploying Helm charts through Lens, which is actually extremely easy. And then we'll begin talking about the extensions that are built on top of Lens as well. So to access our Helm charts, you click Charts on this app icon, and you can see various different repositories that are currently synced to my Lens instance. Now, if you choose to find other repositories, that's very much fine. You go to Preferences, scroll down, and you can find all these repos. There's hundreds, if not thousands of different repos that you can select to include when deploying Helm charts, when you go and search for a different Helm chart package. For demonstration purposes, we won't add any of those other ones. I have my stable, I have my Bitnami, and I have my Mirantis Helm packages. I like those repos. They work for me. I never have any issues with my clusters, so we'll stick to that. Users also have the ability to bring their own Helm repos as well. right? So a user can go add custom Helm repo and immediately get the opportunity to bring their own repo directly to Lens as well, which is quite amazing. Jumping back to our app section, we'll look for a Helm package. I think the one we'll use for today will be, let's do Workspace. That seems easy enough, right? We'll search for Workspace. And of course, let me actually close this. We can see the repo that it's associated with, the version, the app version, and so forth. And then immediately we can see everything associated to this Helm package, right? The details, where it lives, the maintainers, the keywords, how to install it, how to deploy it, and so forth. Awesome. To be able to deploy this Helm chart, it's actually quite simple. All we really have to do is click install. I think it's 2 clicks. So it begins pulling it up. And of course, you can see the entire resource here. You can make config changes if you decide to do so. It's all up to you. And then on the top right, you can see, I'll close this, I'll minimize this for now, but on the top right, you can see install. From here, we'll install it. I've actually already installed this repo before, so let's see what happens. So it has been installed. To view the release, there's several ways to do so. You can obviously click View Helm Release. You can click Releases here, or you can click Releases up here. We'll go here. See, you can see I've installed one 15 seconds ago, and I installed one several days ago as well. Clicking into this, you'll get all the details as well, and the ability to perform various different actions within this resource, right? And of course, you get to see all of the resources that this package is associated with. And as mentioned earlier, we do have the ability to click any hyperlink to access that object or resource. So for example, if I want to see the config map, I can click into it, and then it gives me all the labels, the details, the annotations, and so forth. And of course, based on your RBAC, you can actually just jump into this, view it, and make real-time changes. So we'll cancel this, we'll close this, and that's deploying a Helm chart very easily without writing any command line or kubectl. So it's quite useful when scaling. Before jumping into extensions, I do want to note and show you guys something that I think is quite cool, and we'll switch to my ConCluster. We'll close this. Is when you jump into these screens here, you have the ability to filter for whatever the object may be, a pod, a deployment, a daemon set, a stateful set, and so forth. You can filter by namespaces. So if I only want to view my default namespaces, I can view them immediately, right? And then this works like Excel. You have to uncheck it, and you can view all of them. And again, as mentioned, you can always just click directly into these things, into these objects, to be able to understand how it's performing in the last hour, right? From the CPU, again, to the memory, to the network, and the file system. This is all through the pre-built in Prometheus. The reason why this is valuable, and I'm sure each and every single one of you know already, is in order to do this, you typically need to write some type of command line, right? So we would do get all, oops. We'll open this up. And now it pulls up all of the objects and what they're associated with. But still, we can't filter from here, right? In order to filter, we'd have to run some various different command lines, Linux codes, whatever it may be, to filter further. Lens takes this pain away by just utilizing the user interface to be able to do so. And of course, you can view the metrics and so forth. Awesome. From here, I want to talk about my favorite functionality within Lens, besides the multi-cluster Kubernetes management aspect, which is a smart console on the left-hand side, which I think is actually the coolest. But the next very cool thing is the ability to view different extensions that are built. So to view extensions, we'll click Extensions. And here, you bring in your extension via GitHub or wherever it lives. You'll find the file, and you'll add it directly to it. I currently have some awesome extensions already added. So let's take a look at some extensions. We have many partners in organizations and ourselves constantly building extensions, one, to leverage more cloud native technologies within Lens and the Kubernetes ecosystem, and two, allowing our partners to leverage our users, right? We have 180,000 users currently using Lens. So if you have an awesome technology, for example, that allows you to view security risks within your cluster, you can create an extension, add it to Lens, and allow our users to utilize it. So one of our partners, which is Aqua Security, has actually built this particular extension. I don't have it running right now, but you can see vulnerability reports of your cluster, config audit reports, and so forth. And this is, again, via an extension that I download from GitHub, we have a GitHub repo that's absolutely guaranteed by us, that we always verify and allow to be part of our repo. So long story short, we have them added. From here, there's a couple very cool extensions I want to showcase. One is a Space Invaders extension, which is literally the game where you can kill pods through a Space Invader game. I suggest nobody use this with a production cluster, and I'm sure none of you will. I do like to mention that just in case. So if you play this game, you can kill your pods via Space Invaders interface. Now, my favorite extension to date is our Kubernetes Resource Manifest. We'll scroll out just a tad bit. Here you can see every single Kubernetes resource within my cluster and how they are related to one another. You can view the details, the namespace it's associated to, when it was created, the containers it's running on, the status, and so forth. It is so powerful to be able to see a very, very unique and interesting way of your Kubernetes resources, right? Also, again, you can filter anywhere within Lens. So from here, if I just want to see my kubepublic namespace, we can do so. Lens metrics, right? And we can close these. And these are our metrics and how they're related to one another. Awesome. So I know we covered so many different things, from switching from cluster to cluster, maintaining your role-based access control, allowing the terminal to always match to the correct Kubernetes endpoint, viewing Helm charts, filtering, adding custom resources, viewing extensions, and so much. So I know that was a ton of information at once, and I apologize for that. I do want to note, before we jump into Q&A, some very exciting things coming to Lens. Lens is currently developing a technology that will allow our users to share clusters with one another securely in an encrypted fashion. I won't jump into any more detail, but long story short, we will no longer have to wrangle kubeconfig files, VPNs, air gaps, and so forth to access our teammates' clusters, right? So through a couple clicks of a button, we'll be able to share a cluster with our users. So with that being said, I want to thank each and every single one of you for joining me today. And I want to thank Kong for inviting me to this awesome, awesome conference. I could not be more excited to have each and every single one of you with me today. And now I would love to jump into Q&A. I know we have roughly 5 or 6 minutes left, and I would love to see any type of questions you guys may have for me. Thank you so much for your time. So let's see. I'm going to read. We can, looks good. Cameron, how do the changes that Lens make combine with infra as code config code, and Git ops? Read only one dev clusters for rapid experiments. I see value, but for anything beyond that, I think creating things outside of Git and pipeline seems anti-DevOps. Huh. How do the changes that Lens makes combine with infra as code and config code and Git ops? It's connected via the Kubernetes API. I share same concern, even though I think this may be more useful for ops to actually operate the system short term, the IDO system. Sure. Where can I get a cool Lens hoodie like that? Like this one? That's awesome. Thanks for reaching out, Lorenzo. Absolutely. So join our Slack channel and ping me. So let me actually share my screen one more time and show you guys where you guys can find Lens. So here you guys can find Lens. Here's the GitHub repository where you can download Lens as well. We have our own very awesome website, my email, a Lens email, and here's a direct link to join our Slack community. Within our Slack community, you can interact with myself, different Kubernetes users, hackers, and of course the founding team of Lens. So we really encourage everybody to come join us on our Slack channel, ping us, message us. I would have no problem with sending you guys a hoodie depending on where you are. So that's how you could access one. I hope everybody takes a screenshot of this so you can actually see what is going on. Jumping back to the chat, it seems like we don't have any more questions. Let me stop sharing. Do we have any other questions, guys? Doesn't seem that way. Thank you so much for mentioning that, Leanna. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. It was so much fun to join you guys and demo Lens. I know it was very, very quick, and I apologize for that. It was probably somewhat of drinking out a fire hose, so much information coming at you at once. But I really, really do appreciate each and every single one of you for joining me today. And Kong, thanks for inviting us for such a wonderful conference. We could not be more excited. Thank you, everybody.